Hello and good day to one and all. My name is Christopher Ng Wai Chung and I am the Early Retirement Masterclass Trainer for Dr. Wealth. And today we'll be speaking about a topic which I'm really interested in. It's about developing a little bit of political understanding so that we can improve our investment results. One memory that has always been with me is that when I conducted the first batch of Early Retirement Masterclass Training, we were actually flagged a Sandus India Trust in the final portfolio for my students to decide whether to put into their portfolio. The team that actually did the research actually concluded that they will not include a Sandus India Trust in their portfolio because they felt that Indian politics would be turbulent in the year 2019 and that the ruling party might actually be voted out of power. What happened subsequently was that the ruling party actually won by a landslide, and the Sandus India Trust went on to actually go up about 40 to 50% in value, and it would have been the top performer as part of the portfolio. And failure has always stung me, and is something which I've always regretted. So in all the subsequent batches, I've been telling my students that if your investment thesis depends on a political outcome, it's something that is very difficult to predict, and that if you get it wrong, you can be punished quite broadly. Now, so how do we actually deal with problems like this, right? When your investment results are actually dependent on one or two political outcomes, right? There is not a lot of things that you can do except to actually refine your understanding of international politics. And with that in mind, I'll be introducing 3 books today for you to actually go back and read so that you can become possibly a better investor. All right, so let's go and let's look at our first book for today. All right, so the first book that I have here is entitled The 10 Rules of Successful Nations by Ruchir Sharma. And I think this is a very good primer for someone to get started on understanding which country is likely to be successful over time. Because it's very likely that if you invest in the stocks belonging to a country that is about to be successful in the future, you would be able to get extraordinary returns. And so what this book does is that it actually explains 10 factors on what makes a country successful. Factors such as the population growth of a particular country. If you need to be successful as a country, there has to be positive population growth, and it cannot be one of those countries where the total fertility rate is very low. Okay, and it also discusses what you can do to actually increase a country's population. Like in the case of Singapore, while we have a very low fertility rate, we've succeeded because we've got a very liberal immigration policy in the 1990s, right? Yeah. So the book goes on and talks about other factors that include geography, politics, inequality, state power, and it also discusses investments, inflation, currency, debt, and the amount of hype that the country is receiving from journalists. All right. Now, one particular area which I like a lot from this book is the idea that good investments taken by the government can lead to long-term prosperity. And the book is very clear on what makes a very good investment. So if you have a country like Singapore, right, that basically has a very strong manufacturing base in the 1960s, manufacturing can be a source of prosperity for a lot of countries. So similarly, if you want to look at successful nations, countries have a tendency to begin as an agricultural nation and then they transition into a manufacturing power before it becomes a services-oriented kind of economy. And if you play by these rules, generally speaking, you can expect to do quite well investing in countries like this. However, there are also bad investment bingers, and the bad investment bingers include countries that focus on commodities. So if you are fixated with the natural resources that you have in your country, it basically requires a recession in the commodity sector for your country to begin to suffer a little bit of hardship. All right, so what we're seeing here is the bad bingers done by South American nations and to a much lower extent our neighbors in the north. All these focus on commodities can eventually cause a country to lose its developed nation status. All right, and of course, the other problem lies with real estate, and that is something that I think is hurting a lot of China investors right now. There is a big real estate binge in China, and you see companies like Evergrande being overly leveraged when it comes to real estate. And this is going to shave off a few points of GDP growth from China over the next 2 to 3 years. Okay, well, I wouldn't say any more about this book. I strongly recommend that this book be the first book that you pick up to be able to learn a little bit about the politics of a particular country. All right. So now let's move on to the second book that I'm going to introduce you today, which is Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. All right. And this is a magnificent piece of work. All right. And how do we read this book? All right. The first thing is that once we understand what makes a country successful, the next thing that we want to do is to position a country in a particular stage of growth. So as it turns out, right, what Ray Dalio has written based on his understanding of world history is that societies go through many stages of evolution. All right, I'm going to quickly try to talk about these stages of evolution right now. The first stage is that there is some kind of civil war or crisis, and then a new government takes over, right? The next stage is that this government then begins to rebuild the society, and they do this by building lasting institutions that can trigger prosperity and growth. The third stage, which is the stage which I think Singapore is still in, is that the country then experiences massive growth and prosperity, and the people become a lot wealthier. The fourth stage is, having gone through a period or several decades of prosperity, society reaches a plateau and problems begin to creep in. And one of the major problems at stage 4 is the amount of inequality you have in a particular society. So you realize that countries like Europe and to a certain extent America, right, is that there is this certain amount of mistrust, all right? And the question now is, how do we redistribute the spoils of society to be able to continue to basically carry on and allow prosperity to sort of be extended, okay? But by the time this happens, there is very little growth left, okay, for the population. And finally, if you're unable to actually find a way to redistribute the spoils within the society, conflict begins to occur, and you realize that society will start to fragment, all right? You're not seeing this in Singapore right now, but you're seeing this in the US, like the Capitol riots. You basically have people divided into the left of the political spectrum and the right of the political spectrum. And increasingly, they become more polarized and they do not get along, all right? So once this stage ends and things come to a head, right, it will trigger a civil war, and then the stages in society then starts all over again, right? It goes back to stage 1. Okay, and if you follow the history of China with the changing of the various dynasties, you will find that a period like this can be as short as 30 to 40 years, but it can be as long as a century. Okay, and I think what's very useful for investors is that once you figure out what's successful, okay, you are probably trying to look for countries that are in stage 3, that is enjoying this period of prosperity, just before inequality starts to creep in, and that's where your investments would be able to get the most bang for your buck. All right. Once a country reaches a stage where there is a lot of conflict between different factions, right, like that in the US, who knows, right? Maybe it's time for you to move your money into some other emerging economy. All right. Okay, that's the second book. All right. So the second book allows you to put a particular country in its stage of development so that you'll be able to gain more political insight as to whether your money can go a longer way, all right, investing in their stock market. The third book that I'm going to recommend to you, which is the hardest to read, is entitled Geopolitical Alpha by Marko Papic, right? And if you can conquer the first 2 books, this is the next book that you're going to go for, because this book is actually extremely theoretical, okay? And to actually understand this book, right, you might need maybe an advanced degree, okay, to be able to understand it completely. So I'll give you 2 examples of some of the concepts which I found to be particularly useful and practical for investors. The first concept is dialectic materialism, okay, where it teaches you when analyzing the political situation of a country, always remember that every single analysis need to be tuned to material needs. Okay, so we need to ask ourselves what kind of material constraints are faced by a government, right? So sometimes, like in the example of Greece, when it was about to threaten to leave the European Union, okay, the situation in Greece is such that even though the communists have taken over the country, because there are actually actual constraints governing their economy, they are far better off trying to live with austerity measures, all right, and so the Communist Party has acquiesced to the European Union. They carried on with austerity measures, and Greece is in a state of recovery today. So if you're able to actually apply this properly, you might be able to predict that the situation in Greece many years ago would actually not affect the prosperity of the European stock market at the time. Another very helpful framework, which I think people should be armed with, is the idea of the median voter theorem. Okay, and the idea is that the political party that wins will always be the party that enacts policies that appeal to the median voter, right? But the question is, what is the median voter, right? So that's a question that we want to ask ourselves. So I managed to apply this framework to Malaysia, where if you think about it, right, it is very difficult to dislodge the ruling party UMNO or Barisan Nasional from power, because the median voter is probably, all right, and I could be wrong, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is basically a rural Malay who have a lot to lose if an affirmative action policy like the new economic policy is sort of repealed. So if you think about it, right, even if you have a lot of successive political parties that want to create a more progressive kind of nation, right, any attempt to dislodge or repeal the new economic policy is likely to fail. All right, and that's just not just a sentiment which I share, it is also shared by our leader, the late Lee Kuan Yew. All right, so it's something that every investor in Malaysia would need to take into account of before you actually put in money into the Malaysian stock market. All right. So finally, that's all I have to say about the 3 books that you can read this year to actually improve your political acumen. All right, you can pick these books up in the library. I have a tendency to buy them on Amazon and load it up on my Kindle. Okay, and the useful thing is that these 3 books collectively would be able to allow you to level up in your political analysis. And if you combine that with an Economist subscription, it would really make the reading of Economist articles, which are very, very hard to read, all right, in my opinion, a lot easier. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much.